Operation Epic Fury, the full story of America's largest military mobilization since Iraq. Following large-scale Iranian missile attacks on Israel in late February 2026, the United States military issued combat readiness orders across all service branches. Air Force wings, Marine expeditionary units, and fighter squadrons received immediate deployment instructions. The signal went out at 0400 hours Eastern Time on February 26. Within minutes, every major military installation in the United States began moving personnel and equipment. This was not a drill. This was war preparation on a scale not seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. At Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Marines were woken before dawn and ordered to pack combat gear immediately. Within 2 hours, they were being transported from their barracks to the flight line in military transport vehicles and buses. The convoys moved through the base in darkness, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn fog. Upon reaching the airfield, they found a sight few had seen before. Dozens of C-17 Globemaster III aircraft already positioned on the tarmac in organized rows, rear cargo ramps lowered, auxiliary power units running, engines beginning their startup sequence. The massive transport planes sat under floodlights, their grey hulls reflecting the artificial illumination. Ground personnel in reflective vests worked frantically around each aircraft. Forklifts carrying wooden pallets stacked with equipment moved back and forth across the tarmac. Cargo trucks delivered container after container. Portable field generators wrapped in protective netting, ammunition crates marked with caliber designations and lot numbers, encrypted radio systems in shock-proof cases, battlefield medical kits containing trauma supplies and surgical instruments. Each pallet was weighed, logged, and positioned inside the aircraft's cavernous cargo hold. Loadmasters directed the placement with hand signals, ensuring proper weight distribution for flight safety. Every piece of equipment was secured with heavy-duty cargo straps anchored to tie-down points built into the aircraft floor. Nothing could shift during flight. A loose pallet at 30,000 feet could destabilize the entire aircraft. Marines stood in formation on the tarmac, rifles slung, body armor worn, helmets secured. They watched the loading process while awaiting their turn to board. Some were veterans of previous deployments, others were heading to a combat zone for the first time. All understood what this mobilization meant. The C-17s were not flying direct routes to the Middle East. The flight plan called for one intermediate stop at another military installation, either in Europe or at a staging base, to collect additional troops and supplies before the final leg across the Atlantic and into the Persian Gulf region. Each aircraft could carry 102 fully equipped soldiers plus cargo. Today, they would carry both. Fort Bragg, the heavy equipment convoy. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the 82nd Airborne Division and U.S. Army Special Operations Command, a different kind of loading operation was underway. Multiple C-17 Globemaster III aircraft sat on the apron with ramps down. But instead of soldiers and ammunition crates, these aircraft were receiving armored vehicles. Logistics teams in coordinated pairs drove mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, slowly up the cargo ramps. These 14-ton armored trucks, designed to withstand roadside bombs and small arms fire, had to be positioned with millimeter precision inside the cargo bay. A miscalculation could exceed the aircraft's weight limit or shift the center of gravity dangerously. Behind the MRAPs came light tactical vehicles, the modern replacements for Humvees. These smaller, faster platforms were designed for rapid movement across desert terrain. Their turret mounts could accommodate .50 caliber machine guns or automatic grenade launchers. Armored personnel carriers followed, then specialized vehicles, mobile command posts equipped with satellite communication systems, fuel tankers, recovery vehicles with heavy-duty winches, engineer vehicles carrying obstacle-clearing equipment. Each vehicle was driven into position, chained to the floor with industrial-strength restraints, and inspected multiple times before being cleared. The loading process for a single C-17 could take 3 hours when carrying heavy vehicles. Multiply that across dozens of aircraft, and the scale of the operation becomes clear. This wasn't just a troop deployment. This was the forward positioning of an entire mechanized force. The fighter jet preparation, 72 hours of non-stop maintenance. On a separate section of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina, aircraft maintenance personnel were engaged in what the Air Force calls surge operations, the preparation of an entire fighter squadron for immediate combat deployment. Rows of F-15E Strike Eagles sat on the flight line, their twin-engine frames gleaming under work lights. These aircraft would not be flying to the Middle East empty. They would be armed, fueled, and ready to begin combat operations the moment they touched down. Each jet underwent a comprehensive pre-flight evaluation that would normally take days. Today, it was being compressed into hours. Avionics technicians climbed into cockpits and powered up electronic systems. They ran diagnostic tests on radar arrays, checking signal strength and target acquisition capability. Multifunction displays were tested, heads-up display systems verified, targeting pods inspected for damage or calibration drift. Other technicians examined the aircraft's electrical systems, opening access panels along the fuselage to inspect wiring bundles, circuit breakers, and data buses. Every connection was checked, every sensor tested. A single malfunctioning component could abort a mission, or worse, endanger the pilot during combat. Meanwhile, weapons specialists prepared the armament. On rolling carts, they brought AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, radar-guided weapons capable of engaging enemy aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 kilometers. Each missile was lifted carefully onto the wingtip launch rails using a specialized hoist. Mounting lugs clicked into place. Electrical connectors were attached, linking the missile to the aircraft's fire control computer. Underneath the wings, heavier ordnance was being loaded. GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack munitions, 2,000-pound bombs fitted with GPS guidance kits that allowed precision strikes regardless of weather conditions. These weapons could hit targets with accuracy measured in meters, even from altitudes above 40,000 feet. Each bomb was hoisted onto an underwing pylon using hydraulic equipment. The weight, over 2,000 pounds per weapon, required careful handling. Once mounted, electrical connections were verified, data link functionality tested, arming circuits checked. Safety pins were installed in each weapon's fusing mechanism, bright red flags attached to them as visual confirmation. These pins would remain in place until moments before takeoff, preventing accidental detonation on the ground. After weapons installation came the engine inspection. Mechanics removed the protective cowlings covering the F-15's twin Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines. They visually inspected turbine blades for cracks or stress fractures. Fuel lines were examined for leaks, oil levels checked, ignition systems tested. The F-15E's engines generate 29,000 pounds of thrust each. At full afterburner, they consume fuel at a rate of hundreds of gallons per minute. Any mechanical failure during combat operations could be catastrophic. Every aircraft on the flight line went through this identical process. One fighter after another: fuel, weapons, airframe, avionics, flight controls, engines, tires, brakes, hydraulics. By the time pilots arrived for their mission briefings 48 hours later, every jet on that ramp would be fueled, armed, inspected, and cleared for combat operations. The soldiers, packing for an unknown timeline. In a staging hangar at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division, hundreds of soldiers prepared their personal equipment for deployment. They moved through the hangar in organized groups, each soldier assigned a specific packing station. On long tables sat their standard-issue duffel bags and tactical backpacks, empty and waiting to be filled. The packing list was specific: combat uniforms, Army combat uniform in operational camouflage pattern, 4 sets, desert boots, 2 pairs body armor with ballistic plates, Kevlar helmet with night vision mount personal hygiene kit, toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, razor, towel. Individual first aid kit, tourniquets, gauze, compression bandages, sleeping system, sleeping bag, ground mat, bivy sack, cold weather gear, jacket, gloves, thermal underwear, personal items, limited to what fits in a small pouch. Some soldiers packed family photos, others packed letters. A few packed small religious texts, Bibles, Qurans, prayer books. No one knew how long they would be gone. The orders simply said, indefinite deployment. That could mean 3 months. It could mean a year. In past conflicts, soldiers deployed for 12 to 15 months at a time. As they packed, non-commissioned officers moved through the hangar conducting inspections. They checked that every soldier had the required items. They ensured nothing unauthorized was being brought. No alcohol, no prohibited electronics, no items that could compromise operational security. This was not a peacekeeping rotation. This was a combat deployment to an active war zone where American forces would be conducting offensive operations against a nation-state adversary. Once packing was complete, the duffel bags were staged in organized rows near the hangar entrance. Each bag was labeled with the soldier's name, rank, and unit designation. They would be loaded onto trucks, transported to the airfield, and placed aboard C-17s for the flight to the Middle East. The soldiers themselves would follow hours later. The boarding, dusk departure. As evening approached on February 27th, the order came down: prepare for boarding. At military bases across the United States, Camp Lejeune, Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell, Fort Hood, Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, thousands of soldiers and Marines formed up outside their staging areas. They assembled in company-sized formations, roughly 150 personnel each. Non-commissioned officers conducted final head counts. Officers verified manifest lists. Then, in organized columns, they began marching toward their assigned aircraft. The walk across the tarmac was silent except for the sound of boots on pavement and the distant roar of jet engines. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the flight line. Floodlights began flickering on, illuminating the waiting C-17s. One by one, the formations reached their aircraft. They climbed the rear ramps, steep metal inclines leading into the cargo bay, and took their designated seats. Inside the C-17, seating is utilitarian. Soldiers sit on webbed benches running along both sides of the cargo hold, facing inward. The benches are uncomfortable, designed for function, not comfort. There are no windows except for small portholes near the crew stations. The interior is loud, cold, and industrial, but it works. The C-17 can carry 102 fully equipped soldiers across oceans and continents, land on short runways in austere locations, and return to do it again. Loadmasters moved through the cargo bay conducting final checks. They verified that all cargo was properly secured. They counted personnel against the manifest. They ensured seatbelts were fastened. Then they moved to the rear of the aircraft and activated the hydraulic system. The massive cargo ramp began to rise, sealing shut with a heavy metallic thud. Pressure equalized. The cabin went dark except for red overhead lights. The pilots completed their pre-flight checklists. Clearance was received from the tower. Engines spooled up to full power. One by one, the C-17s began taxiing toward the active runway. They lined up in sequence, aircraft number 1, then 2, then 3, continuing down the line. Each waited its turn. When clearance came, the first C-17 advanced onto the runway. Brakes released, throttles pushed forward. The 4 Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines roared. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, gaining speed, 130 knots, 140 knots, 150 knots, and then the nose lifted, the main gear left the ground, and the massive transport climbed into the darkening sky. Another followed 90 seconds later, then another, then another. The departures continued into the night. Arrival in the Middle East, the immediate unloading. 14 hours later, the first C-17s touched down at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest US military installation in the Middle East. The moment wheels hit pavement, the process reversed. As the aircraft taxied to the cargo ramp, ground crews were already positioning equipment: forklifts, cargo tractors, fuel trucks. The C-17 came to a stop. The engines remained running. There was no time for a full shutdown. The rear ramp hydraulics activated and the cargo door lowered. Heat rolled into the cargo bay. Desert heat. Dry, intense, oppressive. Soldiers who had boarded in 40-degree North Carolina weather now faced 95-degree Middle Eastern temperatures. They stood, grabbed their gear, and filed down the ramp in single file. Boots hit the tarmac. They were in theater. Behind them, the unloading began. Chains were released from vehicles. Engines started. Drivers backed MRAPs and tactical trucks down the ramp and onto the taxiway. Forklifts extracted cargo pallets. Equipment was staged in designated areas for distribution to forward operating bases. The entire offloading process took 45 minutes. Then, without delay, the C-17 taxied back to the refueling area. Fuel hoses were connected. Tanks were topped off. Within 2 hours, the aircraft would be airborne again, returning to the United States to pick up another load of troops and equipment. This cycle would repeat for days. For the soldiers stepping off that ramp and onto Qatari soil, this base was now home. How long? Unknown. Weeks, months, perhaps longer. They grabbed their duffel bags, followed directions from base personnel, and headed toward their assigned quarters, temporary housing in prefabricated buildings or large tents. The build-up for Operation Epic Fury was underway, and more flights were already inbound. The airfield. Round-the-clock fighter preparation. While troops settled into their quarters, maintenance operations on the flight line never stopped. Across the sprawling airfield at Al Udeid, rows of fighter jets sat in organized formations. F-15E Strike Eagles, F-16 Fighting Falcons, F-35A Lightning IIs, some parked under open sky, others sheltered in reinforced hangars designed to protect aircraft from missile strikes. The work continued 24 hours a day in rotating shifts. Refueling teams moved from aircraft to aircraft. Fuel trucks, massive vehicles carrying thousands of gallons of JP-8 aviation kerosene, pulled alongside each jet. A crew member climbed onto the aircraft's wing, opened the single-point refueling port, and connected the pressurized hose. JP-8 began flowing into the aircraft's internal tanks. Flow rates were monitored on digital gauges mounted on the truck. A typical fighter holds 13,000 to 18,000 pounds of fuel, depending on the model. Refueling takes 8 to 12 minutes per aircraft. When tanks reached capacity, the connection was detached, the access panel secured, and the truck moved to the next jet in line. Simultaneously, ordnance teams delivered munitions. Weapons arrived on specialized transport dollies, low-profile carts designed to safely carry missiles and bombs across the airfield. Each cart was pulled by a small tractor driven by certified weapons handlers. AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles were lifted onto wingtip launch rails using hoisting equipment. The weapons weighed 335 pounds each. Mounting lugs were aligned precisely and locked into place with mechanical catches. Electrical connectors were attached, interfacing the missile's guidance system with the aircraft's fire control computer. Technicians used handheld test equipment to verify proper data link communication. If the aircraft couldn't communicate with the weapon, it couldn't fire it. Underneath the wings, heavier ordnance was installed. GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack munitions, 2,000-pound GPS-guided bombs, were hoisted onto underwing hardpoints using hydraulic lift systems. Each weapon required careful alignment on the pylon. Once secured, electrical connections were verified, arming circuits tested, safety pins installed with bright red warning flags attached. These pins would remain in place until immediately before takeoff. They physically prevented the weapon from arming. Only after the pilot taxied onto the runway and received final clearance would the ground crew remove the pins. Post-installation inspections followed. Weapons teams examined every mounting lug, every electrical connection, every safety mechanism. They checked pylon alignment to ensure the weapon would release cleanly during flight. A misaligned bomb could strike the aircraft during release, a catastrophic failure. This process repeated for every fighter on the flight line. One aircraft after another progressed through the same preparation sequence: refueling weapons installation, airframe inspection, avionics systems, check flight control surface verification, engine examination. By the time pilots arrived for mission briefings at 0500 hours on February 28th, every jet on the ramp had been fueled, armed, inspected, and cleared for combat operations. At 2 a.m. Tehran time, exactly 14 hours after the first troops landed in Qatar, Operation Epic Fury began. American and Israeli jets struck nearly 900 targets across Iran in 12 hours. The war had started.